I would like to talk about emptiness. It's actually a paradox talking about something that is empty and filling it with words or trying to describe it with words. I think a nice way to experience emptiness is to ask yourself, what will be my next thought? And then you just wait to see your next thought. And in that moment where you're waiting to see your next thought, you become aware of the aspect of yourself that is thinking. Not the thoughts, but the awareness that drives the thoughts. It is a skill that you can practice to become more aware of emptiness and to cultivate that space within yourself. I remember the first time that I experienced emptiness. I was like 16 and I was taking a shower, and suddenly I thought, wait, what am I gonna think next? and no thought came. and I was like kind of freaked out by it. Because I think it takes a level of trust to abandon thoughts. Because so much of our identity is based on thoughts. Or at least our false identity. Or the identity we construct. But underneath that construct of the thought-based identity is another identity that has no name, that has no label, that has no identifications. And that identity you can only be, and you can only know it through being. Another thing I like to use to bring myself into emptiness is the diversion of attention. Because through attention does your thought-based identity live. If you don't pay attention to your thought-based identity, then it doesn't exist. That is also why some people like to say they do not exist. Because their existence depends on the continuous recreation of the psychological patterns of the thought-based self. I am a man, I am a musician, I am a traveling musician, I am a writer. And then all these reflections, how people have perceived me, this is all my thought-based self. But in this moment, if I don't think about this, but rather listen to the sounds of the birds, the talking in the distance, the fishes jumping, if I fully immerse myself in that experience, am I still the traveling musician, the writer? Not really. That has to do with the past and maybe the future, but who knows? Maybe I won't be a musician anymore in 5 minutes. Maybe. No, but the point I'm making is that when you really focus on this experience of the senses, the thought-based self dissolves. And it doesn't exist anymore. You might recreate it later when you feel the need to. And that is another point. The need for a false self or a thought-based self. I don't like the word false self because it kind of puts a judgment. False, so not good, because we want something that's not false. But rather use the word thought-based self. But this thought-based self we are invested in it through a need. And that need can be experienced as a sensation. So when you, for example, try to be really still and then encounter somebody, you go in a coffee shop and you notice them looking at you, trying to make immediately a judgment about you, not negative necessarily, but just sort of every person categorizes the people they interact with. So when you are in a suspended state of emptiness, not identified with your thought-based self, and you encounter somebody, you might feel it as a bodily sensation, your need to adapt to their expectation of who they think you might be. I find that very interesting. When you engage with different people that have different expectations of how they're supposed to relate to you, and then to feel those expectations as bodily sensations. And sometimes they're very strong to the point where I respond and I embody the character they expect me to be. Other times I manage to just stay present with that as a feeling and to experience it as a body sensation. I think that is what I find very interesting at the moment. I feel like moving towards emptiness, everybody encounters their own limitations of being able to hold emptiness and still interact with a reality that's largely constructed and based on thoughts and values and rules and expectations. The other day I was camping in the woods and I met this guy. He told me he had 2 corporate jobs and at some point he decided enough's enough, put his backpack on and just walked out and started walking across the country. And he said, I'm just looking for a place to be. I want to just be. And we both laughed about it so much because it's very hard to just be in this society. It's, first of all, not even recognized that being is the essential quality of every human being. I mean, it's in the word, human being. But yet, we're more involved with human doing and human achieving. To the point where it's difficult to just be. So, I find this very interesting, this clash of these 2 paradigms. Of beings that want to be, and of beings that want to perpetuate the value systems and social structures our ancestors have put into place. And this is an unconscious process for most people, in the sense that we get traumatized by our parents, the school system, and then by the need to find a job, make a living, pay our bills. And that whole process is so intense that it actually convinces us to participate. And then in that process it becomes habituated. when we spend decades immersed in a value system based on achievement and expectation, it's hard to extricate ourselves and be like, wait a minute, I just am. I am just a being. I'm none of these things that society wanted me to be or wanted me to do. So I find this a very interesting edge of how do you bring your emptiness, your being, into a social context. Because it's much, much easier to go out in the woods and just be on your own. And it's much harder to go back to society and do a job and maintain your emptiness, maintain the awareness of your awareness, the awareness of that deeper layer of the self, which isn't driven by thoughts, but which is literally the core of your reality, which is that emptiness. It's your attention, it's your focus, it's your will. And I think that society has evolved this perception that morals are something that need to be enforced on us from the outside. And I think that probably ties back to the corruption of Christ's teaching, when the church bent his words so that people would feel guilty about being sinners. And this whole idea that the human being needs to be rectified to fit into an ideal. But I think that we already are that ideal if we stop trying to be anything other than who we are. I think that morals are a natural process of finding your emptiness. That if you are in that still point, then feeling that naturally emerges in that place is love, is compassion, is benevolence. And those aren't things that come from the outside. Maybe you can notice, oh, here I'm losing the connection to my still point, and my psychology is trying to get involved with the situation in a way to benefit myself or to leverage the situation for my own benefit. And then it's not so much about acting in a way that is considered good, but rather to take a step back there and say, okay, well, I lost my still point, let me get back to it. And then just go and be still. Focus on your breath, or bring your awareness on the sounds around you. Feel the sensations in your body. And if you get to that point, you'll most likely feel then the bodily pressure of the outdated value system trying to perpetuate itself. And then not to judge it either, because that is another thing that often happens when you start to taste the essence of yourself, that when you lose it, you judge yourself. I lost that great feeling, I want it back so bad. And then of course you can't get it back because you're trying too hard. So I think it's also a level of accepting your own imperfections. And that's, I think, why a lot of spiritual teachers say you already are perfect. Because that's a useful model to counteract that clinging to those highs that you can experience through meditation, yoga, or Qigong, or any other mind-body practice. Because if we cling to the highs, we pull ourselves into the depths. It seems to work that way, that we can only have those things that we are also willing to give up. And when we're completely okay to give it all up, it all comes back. And I think that ties back to the shamanistic concept of the death and rebirth. And you can also find that in esoteric Christianity, the crucifixion of the small self, as some Christian mystics refer to it. But I think that is really the essence of this is the willingness to die, to give it all up, to let it all go, even your own life. And that might sound like an outlandish and scary idea if you're very deeply invested in this life and in the personality you've created in that life. But usually what happens when somebody approaches that point through a mystical experience, when they choose to let it all go, the only thing that really goes away is the struggle. I've had several ego death experiences where through intense meditation I was brought to a point where I believed I was actually dying. And when I struggled against that death, the pain only got worse and the fear got worse, to the point where I was like, okay, well, this doesn't work. I have to just let it all go. And those are the most profound experiences and very life-changing. Because it gives you trust. It gives you trust, and also it distances you from all that clinging and obsessing about the needs of your personality. Yeah, I think it's all a balancing act. And you're in that balancing act. So sometimes it seems like, whoa, where is this going? And then suddenly you realize, oh, no, it goes the other way. And it's kind of like we are being moved by this cosmic wind. And our life is the expression of that force. And I think the only way is to embrace it with trust. Even if you can't justify it intellectually. Emotionally, it moves you forward. And forward meaning towards that emptiness, towards that still point, and towards the love that you find in that still point. Yeah?